You probably think you know ancient Egypt. Pyramids, mummies, pharaohs marrying their sisters. The usual stuff from documentaries. But what if I told you that regular Egyptian couples had marriage rights and freedoms that wouldn't be seen again for thousands of years? What if their approach to love, sex, and relationships was so ahead of its time that it would shock people from later civilizations? The truth about marriage in ancient Egypt isn't what you'd expect. It's way more interesting, and honestly, way more progressive than most societies that came after. In this video, we'll explore how these ancient people created a system of marriage that balanced practical needs with genuine romance, gave women remarkable legal protections, and was built on the belief that true love could literally last forever. If you like these videos, I would appreciate if you clicked like or subscribed, as it's important for the channel and it helps others find it too, just like you did. Thank you. Now, let's get started. Picture that moment when you step into a world where absolutely everything feels backwards. That's exactly what happened to a Greek historian who found himself walking through ancient Egypt, completely bewildered by what he saw. The customs, the relationships, the way people lived their daily lives. It all seemed to flip his understanding of the world upside down. And you know what? He had a point. Egypt really was different, in the most fascinating ways possible. Let's drift back to those ancient Egyptian mornings, when the air was thick with desert heat and the scent of the Nile. Imagine waking up on a simple reed mat that crackles every time you move. The walls around you are made of mud brick, sturdy and cool, with just small windows carved out to let in that distinctive Egyptian light. The morning smells would hit you right away. That muddy sweetness of the river, mixing with smoke from cooking fires, starting up across the town, bread baking somewhere close by, and floating through it all, the mysterious scent of kefi incense, a blend of myrrh and frankincense and raisins, burning in little copper dishes to please the gods and keep homes pure. Your feet would touch packed earth floors, surprisingly cool despite the growing heat outside. Through those small windows you'd hear the sounds of life beginning, voices calling back and forth, pottery clattering, the stubborn bray of donkeys already pulling their carts through narrow streets. This is Egypt around 1400 BCE, during what we call the New Kingdom. And if you think you know about Egyptian love and marriage from all those documentaries about pharaohs, well, prepare to be surprised. See, when people think about ancient Egyptian relationships, they immediately jump to those royal marriages between brothers and sisters. Yes, that happened, but only in the royal families. For regular people, for the farmers and craftsmen and merchants who made up most of Egyptian society, love worked completely differently. Marriage in ancient Egypt was this beautiful blend of practical arrangement and genuine affection. It was business-minded, sure, but it was also deeply personal in ways that might actually put some of our modern relationships to shame. Here's something that would have absolutely stunned that Greek visitor. Egyptian marriages didn't involve religious ceremonies at all. There was no ceremony, period. No walking down aisles, no white dresses, no priest declaring you husband and wife. Nothing like what we imagine marriage should be. Instead, it was refreshingly simple. When two people decided they wanted to be together, they basically just started living together. The woman would move her belongings into the man's house, or sometimes they'd find a new place together. That was it. They were married. But don't mistake this simplicity for casualness. These relationships were taken very seriously by everyone involved. Families negotiated, discussed dowries, made sure both sides understood what they were getting into. It was just that the actual transition from single to married happened without all the pomp and ceremony. What's even more interesting is how Egyptian society viewed women in these relationships. While most ancient civilizations treated women like property, transferring them from father to husband like valuable objects, Egypt was remarkably different. Egyptian women could own property, they could run businesses, they could divorce their husbands if things weren't working out, they could inherit money and land from their families. In a world where women in most other places had almost no legal rights, Egyptian women were surprisingly independent. This independence extended into their daily lives, in ways that would have seemed scandalous to visitors from other cultures. Egyptian women walked freely through markets, chatted with neighbors, conducted business deals. They weren't hidden away or required to cover themselves completely. Marriage contracts in Egypt were fascinating documents. They spelled out exactly what would happen if the marriage ended, who got what property, how children would be cared for. These weren't romantic love poems, they were practical agreements between two people planning to build a life together. But here's where it gets really interesting. Despite all this practicality, Egyptians absolutely believed in love. Their poetry, their art, their stories, all filled with passionate romance and deep emotional connections between couples. They just understood that successful marriages needed both love and practical planning. The Egyptian concept of the ideal couple was two people who complemented each other perfectly, not identical, but balanced. Where one was weak, the other was strong. Where one struggled, the other excelled. It was this beautiful idea of partnership that went far beyond just romantic attraction. They even had their own gods of love and marriage. Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and beauty. Isis and Osiris, the divine couple whose love story involved death, resurrection, and eternal devotion. These weren't just religious figures. They were examples of how relationships could work at their very best. Daily life for married couples in ancient Egypt revolved around shared work and shared responsibilities. Husbands and wives often worked side by side, whether that meant farming, crafting goods to sell at market, or running larger business enterprises. Marriage was truly a partnership in every sense. Children were considered blessings, gifts from the gods that strengthened the bond between husband and wife. But even childless couples were respected and considered complete families. Love, not reproduction, was seen as the foundation of marriage. When marriages did end, and they sometimes did, the process was surprisingly civilized. Divorce was legal and relatively straightforward. Property got divided according to those marriage contracts we mentioned earlier. Children typically stayed with their mothers, and both parents remained involved in their lives. This practical approach to relationships, this blend of romance and realism, created a society where people could pursue happiness while still maintaining social stability. It was a system that worked, that produced strong families and successful communities for thousands of years. Perhaps that's what really amazed visitors like our bewildered Greek historian. Here was a civilization that had figured out how to honor both the heart and the head, how to be both passionate and practical, how to build lasting relationships in an uncertain world. Egyptian love stories weren't fairy tales, they were real life, with all its complications and compromises and genuine deep affections. And maybe, in our own complicated modern world, there's something we can learn from their wisdom. The morning sun begins to warm the mud brick walls of an ancient Egyptian village, where something remarkable is happening. A young woman walks slowly down a dusty street, carrying a wooden chest. Behind her, two older women balance baskets filled with linens, pottery, and household goods. The neighbors have gathered to watch, calling out blessings and good wishes. What looks like a simple move is actually a wedding ceremony, Egyptian style. This is how marriage worked thousands of years ago along the Nile. No priests, no elaborate rituals, no signed documents. When a woman crossed the threshold of a man's house with her belongings, they became married, just like that. The moment her possessions entered his home, their union was official in the eyes of everyone who mattered. Musicians appear from somewhere, carrying simple reed flutes and small hand drums. The rhythm they create is gentle, hypnotic, matching the steady pace of this ancient procession. There's something deeply peaceful about witnessing this scene from history, where life moved at the speed of human footsteps rather than rushing clocks. Marriage back then started with practicality rather than romance. When a young man reached 16 or 20 years old, he'd begin looking for a partner. Girls were much younger, often just 12 to 14, right after their first monthly cycles. By our modern standards, this seems incredibly young, but when most people only lived to see 30 or 35 years. There wasn't time for lengthy courtship periods or years of self-discovery. Life moved faster because it had to. Every season mattered, every harvest, every year of health and strength. Young people understood that building a family meant securing survival, not just for themselves, but for their entire community. The village depended on each household contributing, on each marriage creating stability. The most crucial requirement for marriage wasn't love, at least not at first. A man needed steady work, some reliable income, his own dwelling. Women weren't expected to provide financial security, but they brought essential domestic skills and usually a dowry of household items. These weren't just gifts, they were investments in the future. When families agreed on a match, and yes, parents typically had the final say, they would create something remarkably modern. A prenuptial agreement, laying out exactly what property each person brought to the marriage, and what would happen to those possessions if things fell apart. Ancient Egyptians understood that clear agreements prevented future conflicts. But here's where Egyptian culture becomes truly fascinating. Women had rights that wouldn't exist elsewhere in the ancient world for thousands of years. That prenuptial contract protected the woman's property completely. Whatever she brought into the marriage stayed hers. Her husband couldn't touch it, couldn't sell it, couldn't claim it as his own. She could also inherit property from her parents independently, without her husband's involvement or permission. Even more remarkable, she could buy and sell property on her own, making business deals and financial decisions that women in Greece or Rome could only dream about. Egyptian wives were partners, not possessions. The wedding procession continues down the narrow street, past houses where other families are beginning their daily routines. Women emerge with large clay jars, heading toward the Nile to collect fresh water. Children dart between the adults, their laughter mixing with the gentle music of the flutes. The rhythmic scraping of dough, being kneaded for morning bread, creates a soundtrack of ordinary life continuing. Around this special moment, the bride looks nervous but excited, glancing back occasionally at her family, then forward toward her new home. This threshold she's about to cross represents more than just changing addresses. It's the moment when she transforms from daughter to wife, from one family's responsibility to another's partner. The heat builds as the sun climbs higher. But there's something soothing about the warm air, the gentle sounds, the unhurried pace of this ancient ceremony. The packed earth street feels solid, underfoot, worn smooth by generations of similar processions, other brides carrying their hopes and belongings toward new beginnings. What strikes you most about this scene is how civilized it all seems. Despite living thousands of years ago, these people had figured out legal protections, property rights, and social contracts that many cultures wouldn't develop until much later. Egyptian women could divorce their husbands if needed, keeping their own property and often receiving additional compensation. This wasn't a society where women disappeared into their husbands' families. They maintained their identities, their possessions, their connections to their birth families. The bride walking ahead of you carries not just household goods, but legal rights and social protections that made her a true partner in the marriage she's entering. The procession slows as they approach a modest house with a wooden door painted bright blue. This is the moment, the crossing of the threshold, that will transform two separate lives into one shared household. The music grows softer, more reverent, as if the musicians understand the significance of what's happening. Ancient Egyptian marriage was practical, yes, but it was also surprisingly progressive. Built on mutual respect, legal protections, and the understanding that both partners brought valuable contributions to their shared life. In a world where survival depended on cooperation, they created a system that protected everyone involved while still honoring the deep human need for companionship and family. Picture yourself wandering through an ancient Egyptian neighborhood where the sound of celebration drifts from a nearby house. The air is thick with anticipation, and something remarkable is unfolding. Something that would shock most ancient civilizations. In this world, along the banks of the Nile, women held a power that seemed almost magical compared to everywhere else. They could simply walk away from their marriages, taking their belongings, their dignity, and about a third of everything the couple had built together. Imagine that, in a time when women in most places were treated like possessions themselves. The children, too, would stay with their mothers. Not their fathers, as you might expect from ancient times. The mother became the anchor of the family, while fathers might contribute support from a distance. This wasn't just unusual, it was revolutionary, turning the typical ancient world upside down. Now, men could also end marriages, but they faced the same financial consequences. Everyone paid a price for walking away, which perhaps made people think twice, or at least negotiate more carefully. The whole system balanced on fairness, in ways that seem surprisingly modern. But here's where things get really interesting. Despite all these practical arrangements, despite marriages often starting as business deals between families, Egyptians believed deeply in romantic love. They wrote poetry that would make your heart skip, verses about voices like pomegranate wine and glances more nourishing than food or drink. These weren't just pretty words either. Egyptian poetry from the New Kingdom period overflows with passion, with longing, with the kind of emotional intensity that people assume was invented much later. They understood that love could transform a practical arrangement into something transcendent. The wedding celebrations themselves were beautifully simple affairs. No elaborate ceremonies or expensive rituals, just families coming together, music filling the narrow streets, and the bride stepping across the threshold of her new home. That moment, that simple crossing, marked the true beginning of the marriage. Egyptian beer flowed freely at these gatherings, thick and sweet, often flavored with dates or honey. It was heartier than anything we drink today, more like liquid bread, nourishing and satisfying. The whole neighborhood would join in, turning private joy into community celebration. Physical affection wasn't hidden away either. Egyptians embraced openly, held hands in public, and expressed their feelings without the shame that marked so many other cultures. They saw love as natural, as essential as the Nile's annual flood. Perhaps most remarkably, they believed these bonds lasted forever. Not just until death do us part, but through eternity itself. Couples planned to be buried together, their tombs decorated with scenes of their continued companionship in the afterlife. All those pyramids and elaborate burial preparations weren't just about preserving bodies, they were about preserving relationships. The paintings on tomb walls show husbands and wives holding hands, walking together through the reed marshes of the afterworld, still devoted, still connected. Death was just another threshold to cross together, like that first step into the marital home. This vision of eternal partnership influenced how couples lived their daily lives. Knowing they were building something meant to last forever, gave weight to small gestures, to everyday kindnesses, to the work of understanding each other. Every shared meal, every quiet evening, every moment of support became an investment in eternity. The whole approach reveals something profound about Egyptian thinking. They didn't separate the practical from the spiritual, the romantic from the eternal. Marriage was simultaneously a legal contract, an economic partnership, an emotional bond, and a spiritual journey. All these elements wove together into something larger than any single aspect alone. Standing in that ancient street, watching a young couple begin their life together, you're witnessing the birth of ideas that still shape how we think about love and commitment. The belief that two people can choose each other, support each other, and build something lasting together. That vision started here, in the shadow of the pyramids, where the desert meets the fertile valley. Picture this moment, thousands of years ago, when love meant something almost unimaginable to us. In ancient Egypt, when two people promised themselves to each other, they weren't just talking about this lifetime. They believed, truly believed, that they would spend eternity together, in the afterlife, holding hands, embracing, sometimes with their children gathered around them. This changes everything about marriage, doesn't it? When you know you're going to be with someone forever, not just until death, but actually forever, you suddenly have every reason in the world to be kind to them. To work on your relationship, to treat each other well, to become the sort of person someone would want to spend eternity with. The ancient Egyptians understood something we might have forgotten. That love, real love, requires you to become your best self, because nobody, and I mean nobody, wanted to be stuck with a difficult person for all of eternity. Now imagine the wedding celebrations that grew from this belief. Picture the neighbors streaming out of their homes, carrying platters of food, the wonderful smells of fresh bread still warm from clay ovens. The aroma of fish caught that morning from the Nile, roasted over glowing coals, sweet honey cakes that made your mouth water just thinking about them. These weren't formal, stuffy affairs. These were community celebrations where a kind older woman might notice a stranger and simply hand them a piece of warm bread. Dense, nutty bread made from coarsely ground emmer wheat, so different from anything we know today. The crust perfectly crisp, the inside still steaming, with that magical taste of something baked 3,500 years ago. There's something almost mystical about sharing food that connects us across all those centuries. The simple pleasure of good bread, friendly company, the feeling of muscles relaxing as you find a comfortable spot to sit and watch love unfold around you. But here's where things get really fascinating. The ancient Egyptians had attitudes toward love and intimacy that would shock many ancient cultures, and honestly might surprise us today. They saw physical affection as natural, normal, nothing to be ashamed of. Couples held hands openly in the streets, embraced in public, showed their feelings without embarrassment. This absolutely scandalized visitors from other cultures. Take Herodotus, the famous Greek historian. He was completely bewildered by Egyptian behavior. You have to understand, he came from a society where women were kept secluded, where public displays of affection were absolutely forbidden. Watching Egyptian couples express their love so openly must have felt like witnessing something from another world. The music at these celebrations would shift and change throughout the evening, sometimes faster rhythms for group dancing, then slower, more sensual melodies that brought couples together. Not the formal, choreographed temple dances, but something natural, spontaneous, real. Even newlyweds, shy with each other at first, would gradually find their rhythm, moving together with growing confidence. And here's something that might surprise you about ancient Egyptian culture. They didn't stigmatize physical relationships before marriage. In fact, there's no word for virgin in the ancient Egyptian language, which tells you volumes about their attitudes. Young people were expected to explore, to understand themselves and their desires before committing to marriage. This was revolutionary thinking, especially regarding women. While most ancient societies controlled women's sexuality strictly, Egypt took a remarkably different approach. They understood that experience, knowledge, and personal choice created stronger marriages. But once you made that commitment, once you chose your eternal partner, fidelity became sacred. Both husbands and wives were expected to remain faithful to each other. Adultery was considered a serious offense, though the definitions varied slightly between men and women, as they did in most ancient cultures. The evening would continue with thick, rich beer that tasted nothing like what we know today. More like liquid bread, really, with a tangy sweetness that could fill your stomach and warm your spirit. People would share stories, laughter, hopes for the future, all while celebrating two souls who had chosen to journey through eternity together. These weren't just parties. They were acknowledgements of something profound. The recognition that love, when it's real, when it's committed, when it's built on kindness and mutual respect, creates something that transcends even death itself. The ancient Egyptians built their entire understanding of marriage on this beautiful, almost magical idea, that the person you choose to love today is the person you'll dance with forever. Picture yourself settling into the warm embrace of ancient Egypt, where the mysteries of family life unfold like papyrus scrolls in candlelight. The air is thick with incense, and stories older than memory itself. Children were everything to these desert dwellers, you see, not just wanted, but desperately needed. Death stalked the young with relentless hunger, so families grew large, hoping some precious lives would slip past mortality's grasp. The mathematics of survival were simple, yet heartbreaking. Have many, love all, hope some endure. But here's something remarkable, something that sets Egypt apart from its ancient neighbors. Little girls were treasured, almost as much as boys, almost. Sons still carried the golden burden of family names, the sacred duty of caring for aging parents. Yet daughters weren't cast aside like unwanted pottery. Female infanticide, that cruel practice so common elsewhere, seems to have found little soil to grow in Egyptian hearts. The wedding celebrations wind down as shadows lengthen across mud-brick walls. Musicians fold away their instruments, pockets heavy with payment. The bride and groom disappear into their new sanctuary, while neighbors drift homeward like leaves on the evening breeze. You feel the pleasant weight of the day settling into your bones, the stone wall still radiating warmth against your back. Now let me tell you about Egyptian pregnancy tests, because they discovered something extraordinary long before modern science caught up. Women would urinate on barley seeds and emmer wheat, then wait. If barley sprouted, tradition whispered of a coming son. If emmer wheat grew, a daughter was on her way. No growth at all meant no baby. Here's the astonishing part, the part that makes you wonder about ancient wisdom. Modern scientists tested this strange ritual and found it works. Not the gender prediction, mind you, that's just hopeful folklore, but detecting pregnancy itself, it succeeds about 70% of the time. Pregnancy hormones in urine actually do encourage seed growth. Imagine those ancient women unknowingly conducting chemistry experiments in their courtyards. Marriage itself followed different rules than we might expect. For men, adultery had a very specific definition. Sleeping with another man's wife, that was the crime. But unmarried women, well, that lived in a different moral territory entirely. The rules bent and shifted like river reeds depending on who you were and what you owned. Oil lamps begin flickering to life in windows as dusk settles over the Nile Valley. The temperature finally breaks, offering blessed relief from the day's scorching embrace. Your body feels increasingly heavy, sinking into that pleasant state between waking and dreams. When childbirth arrived, it became women's sacred territory. Midwives, not physicians, guided the process. This wasn't seen as medical crisis, but as natural transformation, ancient as the river's flooding. Mothers squatted on special birthing bricks, surrounded by other women whose voices formed circles of encouragement and strength. Gods watched over these moments too. Tauret, the fierce hippo goddess, stood guard over mothers and children with protective fury. Bes, the dwarf deity with his terrifying face, scared away the evil spirits that might threaten new life. Prayers and amulets filled the birthing room like invisible shields. If a child survived those first 5 dangerous years, if they slipped past disease and accident and the 100 ways young life could flicker out, then they could expect something resembling a full existence. Common people might see 30, 35 years. The wealthy, with their better food and softer lives, could hope for 50, even 60 years under the desert sun. The streets grow quiet now, empty except for the occasional sandaled footstep echoing between buildings. Darkness spreads like spilled ink across the ancient world, while oil flames dance behind shuttered windows. Your eyelids grow heavy with the weight of centuries, of stories told and retold, until they become part of the very stones beneath your feet. This was life along the Nile, where love and marriage and children created the endless cycle of human hope, where practical magic met daily survival, and where families bloomed like lotus flowers in the muddy, life-giving waters of the great river. The darkness would settle over these ancient villages each evening, bringing with it a peace that's almost impossible to imagine today. Dogs would bark occasionally in the distance. Children's laughter would drift through the air, but mostly there was just silence. A kind of quiet that wrapped around everything like a soft cloth. When you looked up at the night sky back then, you saw something extraordinary. The stars blazed overhead with a brilliance we've lost forever. No electric lights existed to wash them out, no glowing cities to dim their fire. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens, like a shimmering river, bright enough to cast shadows on the ground below. The Egyptians looked at this celestial river, and they thought of their own beloved Nile. To them, the sky was simply another version of the water that gave them life. The cosmos flowed above, just as the river flowed beside their homes. It was a beautiful way to see the universe. Really, everything connected, everything flowing together. These same stars that watched over ancient Egypt still wheel overhead today. They'll keep turning long after we're all gone. There's something comforting in that thought, isn't there? This endless continuity, stretching back through time, connecting us to people who lived thousands of years ago. Those people experienced love, just like we do. They felt their hearts race when they saw someone special. They wrote poetry to express their feelings. They wore perfumes to attract the ones they desired. They built elaborate tombs, hoping to spend eternity together with their beloved. Love made them do extraordinary things, just as it does for us. The process of finding a spouse in ancient Egypt was surprisingly similar to modern dating in some ways. Parents often had opinions about suitable matches. That's true. But young people weren't simply pawns in their families' games. They had choices. They had voices in their own romantic futures. Picture waking up in one of those mud brick villages as the morning sun climbs higher over the narrow streets. The air holds just a hint of coolness from the night, but you can feel it evaporating like a dream. The brutal midday heat will arrive soon, so most people started their day early, before the sun became unbearable. You'd stretch on your reed mat, hearing it crackle beneath you as you sat up. That earthy smell of the Nile would hang in the air, mixed now with the scent of cooking fires and fresh bread. Your stomach would rumble, reminding you it was time to find something to eat. Outside, women would already be gathering at the communal bread ovens, chatting while they waited for their loaves to bake. Children would dart between houses, playing games with small clay tokens. Maybe you'd see a couple walk past, their hands casually intertwined, displaying the kind of public affection that tells you something important about their society. The Egyptians weren't shy about showing love. They believed in expressing their feelings, both in private and in public. They wrote love songs that sound remarkably modern when you read them today, sweet words about missing someone when they're away, about the way love makes ordinary life feel magical. In the wider sections of the streets, small markets would spring up each morning. Vendors would lay out their mats, displaying whatever they had to trade or sell. The chatter of bargaining would fill the air, mixing with the sound of footsteps on packed earth and the distant calls of people going about their daily business. But underneath all this ordinary activity, there was always the deeper current of human relationships. People falling in love, making matches, starting families. The same eternal dance that plays out in every culture, in every time period. Only the details change, the costumes are different, the costumes vary, but the heart of it, the essential human experience of finding someone to share your life with, that remains constant across the centuries. These ancient people understood something we sometimes forget. They knew that love and marriage weren't just personal matters. They were part of the larger flow of life itself. Like the Nile that sustained them, like the stars that guided them, love was one of the great forces that kept the world turning, kept the future unfolding, generation after generation. Picture walking through streets where romance bloomed in ways both foreign and familiar to us today. The air would carry scents of perfume oils, flowers, and the earthy smell of packed dirt beneath countless feet. In these ancient Egyptian markets, love found its voice through gestures that spoke louder than words. The blue lotus flower held secrets that modern bouquets simply cannot match. When a young man offered this delicate bloom to a woman he admired, he wasn't just giving her something pretty to look at. These flowers carried the promise of euphoria, of gentle relaxation when steeped in wine or tea. They symbolized rebirth, the eternal cycle of the sun, and the mysteries of fertility itself. Imagine receiving such a gift, knowing that this simple flower could transport you to a dreamy, blissful state of mind. Courtship in those days moved at its own unhurried pace. Young people would catch glimpses of each other at religious festivals, their eyes meeting across crowds gathered to honor the gods. Family gatherings became stages for carefully orchestrated introductions, where parents might subtly guide their children toward suitable matches. There were no formal rules about dating, no prescribed steps to follow, yet everyone seemed to understand the delicate dance of attraction. The art of showing interest required creativity and patience. A young man smitten with a particular woman couldn't simply approach her directly. Instead, he would enlist the help of a female relative, perhaps his sister or aunt, who would visit the girl's mother for seemingly casual conversation. These meetings were loaded with subtext, each word carefully chosen, each gesture analyzed for hidden meaning. If the initial response seemed promising, gifts would begin to appear, small tokens that spoke of serious intentions. Love poems found their way onto scraps of papyrus, their words carefully crafted to capture hearts across the centuries. Sometimes these romantic verses would be scratched into pottery shards, turning everyday objects into vessels for the deepest human emotions. The permanence of these written declarations shows us how seriously the Egyptians took matters of the heart. Religious symbols played fascinating roles in these romantic exchanges. When a suitor presented his beloved with a small statue of Hathor, the goddess of love and beauty, he was making his intentions crystal clear. Hathor appeared in artwork with cow horns framing her face and a golden sun disk resting between them. She governed not just love, but sexuality and motherhood too, making her image a powerful statement about the giver's hopes for the future. The goddess represented everything feminine and nurturing in Egyptian culture. Her temples were places where women would pray for love, for children, for protection during childbirth. Musicians and dancers honored her with performances that celebrated the joyful aspects of human experience. To give someone a Hathor amulet meant you were thinking beyond simple attraction, you were imagining a life together filled with all the blessings she could provide. Beauty standards in ancient Egypt would surprise us in many ways. The ideals they cherished were both timeless and utterly specific to their culture. These weren't people obsessed with impossible perfection, but rather folks who found beauty in qualities that reflected their values and their environment. Their preferences tell us stories about how they lived, what they feared, and what they hoped for in their partners. The marketplace served as an unofficial meeting ground, where young couples could spend time together without causing scandal, walking among the stalls, selling vegetables, fish fresh from the Nile, and handcrafted tools. They could enjoy each other's company while maintaining the appearance of practical shopping. These moments were precious, offering glimpses into personality and character that formal meetings couldn't provide. Heat shaped the rhythm of romance just as it shaped everything else in Egyptian life. As the sun climbed higher, couples would naturally seek shade, creating intimate spaces beneath awnings and in the shadows of buildings. These weren't planned romantic hideaways, but rather practical responses to the climate that happened to serve love's purposes perfectly. The simplicity of it all carries a certain charm that our modern world has perhaps lost. No elaborate dinner dates or expensive entertainment, just two people sharing space and time, learning about each other through small gestures and quiet conversations. The weight of tradition guided them, yet within those boundaries, genuine affection could flourish and grow into lasting partnerships. Beauty in ancient Egypt told stories about more than just appearance. The ideal woman carried herself with slender grace, but her hips spoke of life yet to come. Full, rounded hips whispered promises of fertility to anyone who noticed. Her breasts remained modest, small, delicate. Her face needed to mirror itself perfectly, each side matching the other in divine harmony. Men painted a different picture entirely. Their shoulders stretched wide like the span of a great bird, while their hips pulled inward, narrow and strong. Arms bulged with muscle earned from daily labor, legs carved with definition from walking endless miles under the blazing sun. Clear skin glowed on both men and women, bright eyes sparkled with health, and teeth gleamed white as polished ivory. But here's where the familiar becomes wonderfully strange. Makeup belonged to everyone, not just women. Both men and women painted their faces with careful artistry every single day. Black coal, ground from coal, traced dramatic lines around every pair of eyes. The color green, pulled from precious malachite stone, swept across eyelids like tiny emerald sunsets. Rouge bloomed on cheeks like desert flowers, while henna stained lips and fingernails the deep red of sunset. This wasn't vanity driving their daily rituals. The heavy black makeup served as ancient sunglasses, protecting delicate eyes from the merciless desert glare. Even more cleverly, these cosmetics carried antibacterial powers, fighting off the infections that love to settle in the corners of eyes in such a dusty, harsh land. Picture yourself wandering through a bustling marketplace, watching a woman arrange gleaming jewelry at her stall. Her eyes draw you in immediately, lined with thick, dramatic kohl that extends toward her temples like wings. The effect strikes you as both beautiful and practical. Against her warm brown skin, around you every face tells the same story. Rich and poor, young and old, man and woman. Everyone wears some form of this protective, beautifying paint. The importance of scent wove itself through Egyptian life like invisible threads. Both men and women adorned themselves with perfumes and scented oils that announced their presence long before they appeared. Your wealth could be measured by the complexity of your fragrance, the layers of expensive ingredients that clung to your skin and clothes. Lotus flowers provided one beloved scent, their sweet fragrance carrying memories of the sacred Nile. Myrrh brought its deep, resinous warmth from distant lands. Frankincense filled temple courtyards and wealthy homes with its holy smoke. Cinnamon added spice and luxury, while countless flowers and tree resins contributed their own notes to this symphony of smell. The wealthy took their devotion to fragrance to fascinating extremes. At parties and celebrations, they would balance cones of scented fat directly on top of their elaborate wigs. As the evening progressed and body heat worked its magic, the fat would slowly melt, releasing waves of perfume while conditioning their skin and hair. By our standards, this might seem rather disgusting, but in the bone-dry Egyptian climate, it proved both practical and luxurious. When marriage finally arrived for young Egyptians, it brought dramatic changes, especially for brides leaving their childhood homes for the first time. The transition could feel overwhelming, scary, exciting, all at once. But Egyptian households rarely stood empty of family, so a new wife often discovered herself surrounded by her husband's parents, brothers, sisters, and their own growing families too. Daily life and married couples painted different pictures depending on where they stood in society's Great Pyramid. For most ordinary Egyptians, dawn's first light meant work began. Immediately, men trudged toward fields heavy with grain, construction sites building tomorrow's monuments, or workshops filled with the tools of their trade. Women typically claimed responsibility for managing the household, but their roles stretched far beyond these domestic boundaries. Egyptian women enjoyed freedoms that would seem remarkable to women in many other ancient civilizations. They could step outside their homes to work as priestesses, serving the gods in sacred temples. Some became professional mourners, their tears and wails helping families properly grieve their dead. Others danced and played music, bringing joy to celebrations and religious ceremonies. Many mastered various crafts, creating beautiful objects with their skilled hands. Some wives even worked shoulder to shoulder with their husbands, partners in family businesses and trades. This wasn't seen as unusual or improper, but as a natural extension of marriage itself. Economic rights belonged to women too, giving them power over their own finances and property in ways that many other ancient cultures never allowed. Picture yourself settling into the soft grass beside the eternal Nile, where the water catches the last golden light of day. The ancient Egyptians understood something about rest that we've somehow forgotten, something that wouldn't resurface in Western culture for thousands of years to come. As the brutal midday sun begins its descent, you notice how naturally your body responds to this timeless rhythm. The heat makes your limbs feel wonderfully heavy, your breathing deeper, more relaxed. Around you, the village follows this ancient pattern. Work in the morning, coolness. Rest when the sun blazes overhead. Then life returning as evening brings relief. There's a poetry to this daily dance, this harmony between human needs and natural cycles. Your eyelids grow heavy in the warmth, and you understand why entire civilizations built their days around these moments of necessary pause. The ground beneath you feels surprisingly comfortable, molded by countless others who found rest in this same spot along the river's edge. When you stir again, the light has changed completely. That harsh white glare has softened into something golden, almost liquid. Time seems to move differently here, flowing like the great river itself. You must have dozed, your body adapting without conscious effort to rhythms far older than memory. The village comes alive again as you watch, people emerging from doorways like flowers opening in cooler air. Conversations bloom, laughter echoes off ancient walls, pottery clatters as evening meals begin their preparation. There's something magical about this daily resurrection, this twice-born quality to Egyptian life. As the temperature drops, couples appear on the pathways, walking together with an openness that might surprise us today. Physical affection flows naturally here, hands intertwining, arms circling shoulders, and waists without shame or hesitation. In their tomb paintings, these same gestures appear again and again, husbands and wives embracing with genuine tenderness. Their poetry speaks of desire, with startling directness, words that could have been written yesterday, instead of millennia ago. One ancient love poem describes a heart that flutters hastily, leaping from its place at the thought of the beloved. The language feels fresh, immediate, untouched by time's usual ability to make things feel distant and formal. Your feet carry you closer to the water's edge, where families spread blankets and children splash in the shallows. The Nile gleams like molten metal, a ribbon of light winding through Green Valley walls that have watched this scene repeat for countless generations. Here, beside water that has flowed since before memory began, couples share their evening meals from single plates. You find your own spot on the riverbank, sinking into grass that feels impossibly soft. The cooler air carries the river's breath, making your skin prickle pleasantly with the temperature change. Nearby, a husband and wife feed each other choice morsels, their heads bent close in intimate conversation. There's something in their easy comfort that speaks of marriage as partnership, not mere social contract. This reflects something beautiful in Egyptian thinking, this belief that good marriages should bring joy and comfort to both people involved. Their wisdom literature advises loving your wife with proper attention, making her heart glad for as long as you both shall live. It's advice that sounds remarkably modern, remarkably human. The rhythmic sound of water against shore begins to sync with your breathing, which has grown deeper, more relaxed without you noticing. Your body feels increasingly heavy, comfortable, settling into natural contours, as if the earth itself welcomes your rest. What makes this scene even more remarkable is what these marriages actually meant for women. Egyptian wives could own property independently, run their own businesses, speak in courts of law, even initiate divorce if they chose. Marriage contracts protected their financial futures with remarkable specificity and care. One contract from centuries past promises 20 pieces of silver upon divorce, plus the return of everything the wife brought to the marriage. Another specifies monthly allowances of grain, oil, and money for the wife's support. These weren't romantic gestures but legal protections, recognition that women deserved security and independence even within marriage. The sun continues its ancient descent, painting the sky in layers of gold, orange, and deepening blue. Along the riverbank, oil lamps begin to flicker to life, creating pools of warm light as darkness gathers like a gentle blanket. The couple you've been watching rises slowly, gathering their belongings with the unhurried pace of people who know tomorrow will bring another day much like this one. They walk hand in hand toward the village, their silhouettes merging with growing shadows, becoming part of the eternal story this place tells every evening. Your own body feels wonderfully heavy now, sinking deeper into grass that seems to cradle you with ancient understanding. The gentle sounds of flowing water mix with distant voices, creating a soothing backdrop as night falls over this timeless scene. Here, beside the eternal Nile, you've witnessed something precious, a glimpse of how people loved and lived and rested when the world was young, when marriage meant partnership, when daily rhythms followed natural law, when rest was not luxury, but wisdom. Picture an ancient Egyptian home, rising from the dusty ground, like a fortress against the desert sun. These weren't the grand palaces we see in movies, but simple dwellings built from mud bricks, baked hard under that relentless Egyptian heat. The walls were thick, wonderfully thick, designed by people who understood their land better than any modern architect ever could. Walking through one of these homes, you'd notice something immediately. The windows were few, small openings that seemed almost reluctant to let the outside world in. This wasn't poor planning, it was genius. Those tiny windows kept the scorching heat at bay, turning each home into a cool refuge when the sun blazed overhead. Inside, life unfolded in spaces that might surprise you with their simplicity. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and gathering place all rolled into one. No separate rooms for every function like we have today, just practical spaces that adapted to whatever the family needed at any given moment. When night fell, and the temperature finally dropped to something bearable, families would climb up to their roof terraces. Imagine lying under that vast, unpolluted sky, where stars shone with a brilliance we can barely comprehend today. These rooftop sleeping areas became the most comfortable bedrooms anyone could ask for during those sweltering summer months. The furniture would seem almost impossibly minimal to our modern eyes. Reed mats covered the floors, serving double duty as seating during the day and bedding when darkness came. These weren't signs of poverty, but rather elegant solutions to the challenges of desert living. Why accumulate heavy furniture when simple mats could transform any space as needed? Wealthier families might own wooden chairs and stools, carefully crafted pieces that represented real luxury in a land where trees were precious. Their beds were works of art in their own right, wooden frames, strung with woven cords or leather straps that supported thin mattresses. Storage happened in baskets, pottery jars, and wooden chests, each item serving multiple purposes in these efficiently organized homes. The thick mud brick walls performed their daily miracle, absorbing heat during the scorching day and slowly releasing it as gentle warmth when the desert night turned cold. It was architecture that breathed with the rhythm of the climate, showing us that comfort doesn't always require complexity. Most of daily life happened outdoors anyway. These homes were really places to sleep, to store possessions, to retreat when the weather demanded it. But the real living happened in courtyards, on streets, in the shade of palm trees, wherever people could gather and share their lives together. The marriage bed itself tells us so much about how these ancient people understood comfort and practicality. Usually just a wooden frame with woven palm fronds or linen cords creating the base, topped with a mattress stuffed with wool, linen, or dried plant fibers. Linen sheets would complete this simple but effective sleeping arrangement. Instead of pillows, Egyptians used headrests, carved from wood, stone, or even ivory. These weren't just about comfort, they were about preserving the elaborate hairstyles that took hours to create. Imagine caring so much about your appearance that you'd sleep with your head supported on a curved piece of wood, keeping every strand perfectly in place until morning. What's remarkable is how the Egyptians approached the intimate side of marriage. Unlike so many cultures that would come later, they didn't surround sexuality with shame or whispered taboos. To them, physical love between married couples was as natural as eating or sleeping, a healthy and pleasurable part of human existence. They even had a god Min, who was depicted with obvious male attributes, and rather than hiding this deity away, they celebrated him openly. This tells us something profound about a culture that could embrace the full spectrum of human experience without the complicated shame that other societies would later attach to such things. Their practical approach extended to family planning too. Egyptian women had access to various contraceptive methods, some surprisingly effective. They created spermicidal preparations using acacia gum, honey, and yes, crocodile dung. That last ingredient might make us wrinkle our noses, but modern science has confirmed that acacia gum actually does have spermicidal properties. Sometimes ancient wisdom contained more truth than we initially realize. They also fashioned linen sheaths that functioned much like modern condoms and developed various herbal preparations for both preventing pregnancy and terminating it when necessary. This wasn't hidden knowledge passed down in whispers, but practical information that helped families plan their futures. Children were treasured in ancient Egypt, perhaps more than in many societies we might consider more advanced. Infertility was seen as a genuine tragedy, something that demanded action from both the medical and spiritual communities. Couples struggling to conceive could turn to religious practices, magical spells, and medical treatments, often combining all three approaches in their quest for children. Women would offer prayers to fertility goddesses like Hathor, Isis, and Taurit, sometimes presenting special cakes shaped like, well, let's just say they were very specifically shaped to represent fertility in its most obvious forms. The Egyptians weren't subtle about asking for what they wanted from their gods. Both sons and daughters were welcomed into these families, though sons did carry certain social advantages. They were expected to care for aging parents and perform the crucial funeral rites that would help ensure their parents' successful journey into the afterlife. But daughters weren't considered burdens the way they were in many other ancient cultures. Egyptian daughters could inherit property, just like their brothers. They weren't seen as financial drains requiring expensive dowries to marry off. This equality in inheritance tells us something important about how these ancient people valued their children, regardless of gender. The whole structure of family life revolved around this balance between practicality and affection, between spiritual beliefs and earthly comfort. These were people who understood how to live well within their means, how to create beauty from simplicity, and how to build relationships that could thrive in the challenging environment of ancient Egypt. Picture a father in ancient Egypt, lifting his small child high above his head, both of them laughing as the afternoon sun filters through their home. This tender scene, carved into stone walls thousands of years ago, tells us something remarkable about Egyptian family life. While many ancient civilizations barely acknowledged fathers in child rearing, Egyptian men were hands-on parents from the very beginning. These artistic glimpses into daily life reveal a world where parenting was, surprisingly, a shared responsibility. Mothers naturally took the lead in those early crucial years, but fathers weren't distant figures who only appeared for discipline or formal occasions. They played, they held, they nurtured their children in ways that would feel familiar to us today. As these little ones grew bigger, their futures began to take shape based on two simple facts: their family's wealth and whether they were born a boy or a girl. If you were lucky enough to be born into a wealthy household, particularly as a boy, the world of reading and writing opened up before you. These skills weren't just about learning, they were your ticket to becoming a scribe, a priest, or a government official. The path of education followed practical lines that made perfect sense for the time. A farmer's child learned to work the land, to understand the rhythms of planting and harvest, to read the moods of the great river that gave life to everything. An artisan's daughter might spend her days learning to weave or make pottery, watching her mother's hands and slowly copying those same movements. But here's what's fascinating. Some girls from well-off families also learned to read and write, something that would have been unthinkable in many other ancient cultures. Egypt had a different way of thinking about what women could and should do. The evidence for genuine love in Egyptian marriages comes to us in the most beautiful ways. Tomb paintings show couples touching tenderly, their faces close together, their body language speaking of real affection that survived the artist's chisel and the passage of millennia. Love poetry from this time doesn't just speak of duty or practical arrangements. It burns with desire and longing, with the deep ache of missing someone you truly care about. Literary texts reveal something even more profound, couples hoping, believing that their love would continue beyond death itself. The afterlife wasn't just about individual salvation, it was about being reunited with the people who mattered most. One of the most intriguing pieces of evidence comes from a tomb that belonged to two royal manicurists, men who cared for the hands and nails of Egypt's most powerful people. Their names were Nyanka and Kumhotep, and in their shared tomb, They're shown in poses that speak of deep intimacy. They embrace, they hold hands, their faces touch in the Egyptian way of showing a kiss. Scholars still debate exactly what their relationship was. Were they brothers who shared an unusual closeness? Were they friends whose bond went deeper than most? Or were they romantic partners in a culture that allowed for possibilities we're still trying to understand? What's undeniable is the affection between them, preserved in stone for thousands of years. This glimpse into their lives reminds us that the Egyptians had a remarkably flexible approach to relationships and gender roles. Women could own property, initiate divorce, run businesses. Men could be nurturing fathers and express deep emotions. Marriage wasn't just about economic arrangements, though practical concerns certainly mattered. It was also about creating partnerships based on mutual respect and genuine feeling. The system wasn't perfect, of course. No ancient society achieved true equality, as we might understand it today. But compared to many of their contemporaries, the Egyptians created something surprisingly progressive, a culture where women had real rights, and where marriages could be built on affection as much as necessity. These marriage customs weren't just personal arrangements between two people. They were part of a larger social fabric that recognized the importance of family bonds, of love that could transcend death itself, of partnerships that could weather the practical challenges of daily life, while still honoring the deeper human need for connection and understanding. The Nile River, flowing past these ancient homes, witnessed countless such relationships. Couples working together to build lives, to raise children, to face whatever challenges came their way. The river's eternal rhythm matched the pulse of these human connections, steady and enduring, carrying both practical wisdom and timeless emotion forward through the generations. The morning light begins to shift and change as the sun climbs higher in the ancient Egyptian sky. Down by the riverbank, women gather with their clay vessels, their movements practiced and sure. The Nile flows past them, carrying with it the life force of an entire civilization. These women know their rhythm, their place in the dance of daily survival. Water collection was never just about gathering liquid. It was about community, about the quiet conversations that happened while waiting for jars to fill. A woman might learn that her neighbor's child had a fever, or that grain prices were rising in the market. Information flowed as freely as the river itself, connecting households across the village. The clay jars they used were works of art in their own right. Potters shaped them with hands that knew exactly how thick the walls needed to be, how wide the mouth should open. Too narrow, and filling took forever. Too wide, and the water sloshed out during transport. Each jar represented generations of trial and error, of potters passing down their secrets. Egyptian marriages operated on a foundation of practical cooperation. When a husband helped his wife carry heavy water jars, he wasn't stepping outside his role, he was ensuring his family's survival. The wooden yokes they used distributed weight evenly across strong shoulders, making it possible to transport enough water for cooking, cleaning, and drinking. Inside their homes, the real partnership revealed itself. Grain grinding was back-breaking work that required strength, patience, and skill. The stone querns worn smooth by countless hands, the rhythmic motion that turned hard kernels into flour. This wasn't just food preparation, it was the foundation of existence. Without ground grain, there could be no bread, no beer, no survival. The houses themselves told stories of adaptation to climate and available materials. Mud brick walls stayed cool during the scorching heat of midday. Reed mats provided comfortable seating and sleeping surfaces that could be rolled up and moved. Storage jars lined against walls, like sentinels, protecting precious supplies from insects and moisture. Egyptian women held more power within their marriages than women in many other ancient civilizations. They could own property, conduct business, and initiate divorce. This wasn't just legal theory, it was lived reality. A woman managing her household resources was making economic decisions that affected her family's prosperity for generations. The brewing of beer was particularly important, and it fell almost entirely to women. Beer wasn't just a beverage, it was liquid nutrition, safer to drink than water, packed with calories and nutrients. The process required timing, temperature control, and an understanding of fermentation that bordered on science. Women who brewed excellent beer earned respect and status in their communities. Children learned by watching, by helping, by gradually taking on more responsibility. A young girl might start by carrying empty jars, then learn to judge when they were properly filled. Boys learned to balance the carrying yokes, to repair them when the wood cracked or split. Knowledge transferred through daily practice, not formal instruction. The clothing they wore reflected both practicality and beauty. Linen was expensive, but essential, breathable and light. In the desert heat, women spent countless hours spinning flax into thread, weaving thread into cloth, sewing cloth into garments. A family's clothing represented months of skilled labor, making each piece valuable beyond its simple function. Hair and wigs created another layer of social expression. Shaved heads stayed cooler and cleaner, while elaborate wigs displayed wealth and status. A woman might own several wigs for different occasions, each one carefully maintained and styled. The contrast between practical necessity and personal vanity played out in these daily choices. Meals brought families together in ways that transcended simple nutrition. The bread that came from communal ovens, the vegetables grown in carefully tended gardens, the occasional meat from special occasions. Food preparation was a social activity that connected women across extended family networks. The rhythm of Egyptian married life followed the sun, the river, and the seasons. Dawn brought water collection and bread baking. Midday meant retreat from the heat into cool interiors. Evening allowed for mending, storytelling, and quiet conversation. This rhythm had persisted for thousands of years, as reliable as the Nile's annual flood. Even in their leisure moments, Egyptian couples worked together. Games like Senet required two players, creating opportunities for conversation and friendly competition. Music and dance brought joy to celebrations and religious festivals. These shared activities strengthened the bonds between husband and wife. The stones worn smooth by generations of grain grinding remind us that marriage, in ancient Egypt as everywhere, was built on countless small acts of cooperation. Each day's water carried, each loaf baked, each jar filled and stored, represented a choice to continue building a life together. The ancient world moves at a different rhythm, one that follows the sun's journey across the sky. In those distant days when the morning light first touched the Nile Valley, men would already be stirring from their sleep, preparing for the day ahead. Most of these men were farmers, their lives tied to the cycles of planting and harvest. They understood something we've forgotten in our modern world, that the earth itself dictates when work should happen. As dawn broke over the ancient landscape, they would make their way to the fields, tools in hand, ready to tend their crops. The heat in Egypt builds slowly, then suddenly becomes overwhelming. These ancient farmers knew this well. They would work steadily through the cooler morning hours, their hands moving with practiced skill through tasks their fathers had taught them. But as the sun climbed higher, they understood it was time to retreat. Midday in ancient Egypt wasn't just hot, it was dangerously hot. The wise thing to do was find shelter, eat the main meal of the day, and rest. This wasn't laziness, it was survival. The human body, after all, hasn't changed much in thousands of years. We still need the same things: shade, water, rest when the world becomes too harsh. While farmers worked the land, other men practiced different trades. In workshops scattered throughout villages and cities, artisans would be busy with their own morning routines. Carpenters shaped wood with tools that would look familiar to us today. Potters spun clay into vessels that would hold water, oil, and grain. There's something beautiful about how these crafts passed from father to son, generation after generation. A boy would watch his father's hands, learning not just the techniques, but the patience, the attention to detail that made the difference between ordinary work and true skill. Metal workers heated bronze and copper, shaping tools and jewelry. Stone cutters carved the blocks that would become temples and tombs. The scribes lived a different kind of life entirely. While their hands got dirty with ink rather than soil, they held tremendous power. In a world where most people couldn't read or write, scribes were the keepers of knowledge. They worked in cool government offices, in temples where incense burned and prayers echoed, or in the homes of wealthy families who needed someone to handle their correspondence. These scribes kept the records that help us understand their world today. They wrote down contracts, recorded taxes, copied religious texts. Their careful handwriting on papyrus scrolls gives us glimpses into daily life that would otherwise be lost forever. As the sun reached its peak, something magical happened in these ancient communities. The bustling energy of morning would gradually fade into stillness. People retreated indoors, seeking refuge from the brutal midday heat. The streets would empty, except perhaps for a stray dog seeking shade, or a child calling out from a doorway. This daily rhythm of activity and rest created a natural pause in life, a time when the whole community would slow down together. It's hard to imagine such a thing in our world of air conditioning and artificial light, where we've largely divorced ourselves from the natural cycles that once governed human life. But even in this ancient world, life wasn't always peaceful. Marriage, then as now, came with its own set of challenges. When you think about it, the basic human struggles haven't changed much over thousands of years. People still had to figure out how to live together, how to resolve disagreements, how to support each other through difficult times. One of the biggest sources of stress was probably the living situation itself. Most Egyptian households weren't just nuclear families. They were extended networks of relatives all sharing the same space. Imagine trying to work out marital problems with your mother-in-law, listening from the next room, or dealing with financial stress while your unmarried brother-in-law lounges around the house. Privacy, as we understand it, simply didn't exist. Young couples had to navigate their relationships under the watchful eyes of parents, siblings, and various other family members. This arrangement had benefits. Certainly, there was built-in childcare, shared resources, wisdom from older generations, but it also meant that every disagreement had the potential to become a family affair. Money troubles added another layer of complexity. The Egyptian economy depended heavily on the annual flooding of the Nile. When the flood was perfect, crops flourished and everyone prospered. But when it was too high or too low, disaster could follow. Families that had been comfortable could suddenly find themselves struggling to pay their taxes. And taxes in ancient Egypt weren't paid with coins, they were paid with grain. If your harvest failed, you still owed the government. Failure to pay could result in forced labor, a terrifying prospect that would put enormous pressure on any marriage. Yet somehow couples found ways to work through these challenges. Ancient Egyptian wisdom literature gives us hints about how they managed. The advice that survives sounds remarkably modern in some ways. There are texts that emphasize communication, mutual respect, and the importance of not trying to control your spouse. One piece of advice that comes down to us across thousands of years warns against micromanaging your wife, especially if she's competent at running the household. Don't constantly ask her where things are, the text suggests, if she's already organized everything properly. It's amusing to think that this particular marital dynamic has persisted unchanged for millennia. As afternoon arrived, the ancient world would slowly come back to life. The harsh midday sun would soften into something more manageable. People would emerge from their houses, ready to resume the business of living. Women would gather at wells, not just to collect water, but to share news and gossip. These moments of community connection were vital in a world without phones or internet. Men would return from their morning work, carrying tools and ready for the evening meal. Children, who had been kept quiet during the hot midday hours, would burst back into the streets, their energy infectious. The sound of their laughter would carry through the village, a reminder that even in ancient times, joy found ways to express itself. The gentle sounds of water lapping against the shore create a rhythm that carries us back, thousands of years, to the banks of the ancient Nile. Picture yourself there, in the fading light of an Egyptian afternoon, where the air still holds warmth, but no longer presses down with the weight of midday heat. In this world, along the river's edge, life unfolds in patterns both familiar and strange. A woman sits by the water, her fingers working quickly through river reeds, weaving them into a basket. Her movements are sharp, deliberate, carrying the tension of someone working through frustration. She's not alone for long, though. Another woman approaches, settles beside her on the soft bank, offering quiet words and gentle touches on the arm. These small gestures of comfort remind us that some things about human nature never change. Even 4,000 years ago, people needed friends, needed someone to listen when life became difficult. The ancient Egyptians understood this deeply, living as they did in communities where privacy, as we know it today, simply didn't exist. Their marriages existed within webs of relationships, surrounded by neighbors who knew everyone's business, family members who offered advice whether it was wanted or not, and friends who provided shoulders to lean on during tough times. When conflicts arose between spouses, and they certainly did, the community often stepped in with counsel, support, sometimes even intervention. What's fascinating is how practical the Egyptians were about marriage when things went wrong. Divorce wasn't wrapped in shame or impossible legal barriers. Both husbands and wives could end their marriages, though the financial arrangements differed depending on who initiated the split. If a husband decided he'd had enough, he faced real consequences. He had to return his wife's dowry, every bit of what she'd brought to the marriage, plus pay a financial penalty on top of that. It was designed to make men think twice before casting their wives aside on a whim. Women, on the other hand, could walk away from their marriages without paying penalties, though they might not receive the same financial settlement. This gave women a kind of power that might surprise us, considering how we often think about ancient societies and women's rights. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Everything we've been talking about, all these rules and customs, applied to ordinary people, the fishermen casting nets from their small boats, the women washing clothes against smooth river stones, the children splashing in the shallows, the pharaohs, those god kings who ruled from their palaces, lived by completely different rules. For them, marriage wasn't about love or even personal compatibility. It was about politics, about forging alliances between kingdoms, about maintaining power across generations. A pharaoh would have his great royal wife, his principal spouse, the woman destined to be mother of his heir, but that was just beginning. He could, and usually did, have numerous secondary wives, each one representing a different political relationship, a different treaty, a different way to strengthen his grip on power. While ordinary Egyptians practiced monogamy, staying faithful to one spouse, the pharaoh's multiple marriages were seen as proof of his divine nature. The more wives he had, the more godlike he appeared to his subjects. It was a reflection of his status as someone who stood between the human and divine worlds. But perhaps most shocking to our modern minds was the practice of sibling marriage within royal families. Pharaohs routinely married their sisters, or half-sisters, something that would have been absolutely taboo for common people. This wasn't seen as wrong or unnatural, though. Instead, it was justified by looking to the gods themselves. Osiris and Isis, two of Egypt's most important deities, were brother and sister, as well as husband and wife. If it was good enough for the gods, the reasoning went, it was certainly appropriate for their earthly representatives, the pharaohs. These royal marriages tell us something profound about how differently the Egyptians saw their rulers. Pharaohs weren't just political leaders, they were living gods, beings who existed by different rules because they served a different purpose. Their marriages weren't personal choices, but sacred duties, ways of maintaining the divine order that kept Egypt strong and prosperous. Meanwhile, back by the river, as the sun begins its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in layers of gold and orange and deep purple, ordinary people gather their belongings and head home to their villages. The woman who was weaving earlier has finished her basket, Her anger worked out through the repetitive motion of her hands. Her friend still sits beside her, and they talk quietly as the day fades around them. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new joys, new reasons to gather by the river and share the weight of human experience. But for now, in this moment between day and night, there's peace along the Nile, the same peace that settled over this land for thousands of years, connecting us across time to people who loved and argued and made up and started over, just as we do today. The river flows on, as it always has, carrying with it the stories of all those who have walked along its banks, their voices mixing with the gentle sound of water over stone, creating a lullaby that speaks of the endless continuity of human life. Imagine walking through the Valley of the Queens on a starlit night, where one of history's most beloved royal wives rests in eternal splendor. Nefertitari, the favorite among Ramesses II's 8 wives, received honors that spoke volumes about their bond. Her husband built her a tomb so magnificent, it rivaled those of pharaohs themselves. But perhaps even more telling was what Ramesses did at Abu Simbel. There, carved into the living rock, Nefertitari's statues stand as tall as the pharaoh's own. In a world where size meant everything, where bigger always meant more important, this gesture whispered of something deeper than political alliance. The ancient sands hold many such stories of unexpected tenderness. Akhenaten and his queen Nefertiti shared something that made court artists reach for new ways to capture human connection. Their portraits show them touching naturally, leaning into each other, sharing quiet moments with their children. What's truly remarkable is how Nefertiti appears in royal art, wielding weapons, striking down Egypt's enemies. This was the pharaoh's sacred duty, his alone, yet there she stands, equal in power, equal in divine authority. Then there's Cleopatra, whose very name conjures images of political intrigue and passionate romance. The last pharaoh of the Ptolemaic dynasty understood that love and power danced together in the ancient world. Her marriage to her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, followed ancient traditions that kept royal blood pure, but Cleopatra's heart and her kingdom's survival led her beyond the confines of sibling marriage. Julius Caesar became her ally, her lover, the father of her child. Later, Mark Antony would fill that role, their relationship securing Roman protection for Egypt's fading independence. These royal marriages reveal something beautiful about human nature. Even when duty arranged the match, even when politics determined the partner, love often found a way to bloom. The evidence lives on in Egypt's love poetry, words that pulse with desire across thousands of years. Listen to this ancient voice. 7 days since I saw my sister, and sickness has crept over me. My limbs have become heavy. I cannot feel my own body. The word sister here meant beloved, a term of endearment that speaks to the intimacy these couples shared. Another poet wrote, "When I kiss her and her lips open, I am drunk without beer." These aren't the stilted proclamations of arranged marriages, but the breathless confessions of people, truly, deeply infatuated. What strikes modern readers is how boldly these ancient voices speak of physical desire. The poetry doesn't shy away from passion, from longing, from the very human need for connection that transcends time and culture. Even more fascinating, women's voices ring just as clearly as men's in these ancient love songs. One female poet wrote, "I will lie down inside and pretend to be ill, then my neighbors will come to see me, and my sister with them. She will make the physicians ashamed, for she knows my sickness." This playful deception, this scheming to see her beloved, shows us women who knew their own minds, who pursued what they wanted with wit and determination. Egyptian society, while not perfectly equal, gave women legal rights, social standing, and cultural voice that was remarkable for the ancient world. These weren't passive figures waiting for love to find them. They were active participants in their own romantic destinies, just as capable of desire, just as willing to express it, as their male counterparts. The night sky above ancient Egypt blazed with stars unknown to our modern eyes, unpolluted by electric light. Under that cosmic canopy, couples shared the same hopes, the same longings, the same quiet moments of connection that define human relationships today. Their marriages might have begun with practical considerations, with family alliances and economic benefits carefully weighed. But the poetry they left behind, the art they commissioned, the tombs they built for each other, all testify to something that went far beyond mere convenience. Love, it seems, has always been love. Whether expressed in hieroglyphs on papyrus or whispered between spouses in a cool evening air beside the eternal Nile, the morning light touched the ancient village walls, and something remarkable was happening. A baby had survived its dangerous journey into the world, and the whole community was gathering to celebrate. Egyptian mothers faced incredible risks during childbirth, with no modern medicine to help them through. When both mother and child made it safely through those first critical days, it really was worth celebrating. These birth celebrations revealed something beautiful about Egyptian society. Children weren't just private family matters, they were treasures for the entire community. Neighbors would bring small gifts, perhaps amulets for protection or food for the new mother. The Egyptians believed that a child's first days determined their entire life path, so everyone wanted to contribute something positive to that beginning. What's fascinating is how much the Egyptians valued children, regardless of whether they were boys or girls. While many ancient cultures heavily favored sons, Egyptian families celebrated daughters almost equally. Girls could inherit property, run businesses, and even become pharaohs in rare cases. This wasn't common thinking for the ancient world. The Egyptian approach to family life was surprisingly modern in many ways. They understood that marriage worked best as a partnership between equals. Women could own property, initiate divorce, and keep their earnings from work. These weren't just theoretical rights either. Legal documents show Egyptian women regularly exercising these freedoms. When it came to love and romance, the Egyptians had a refreshingly healthy attitude. They wrote beautiful love poems that celebrated physical attraction and emotional connection. They didn't see sexuality as shameful or something to hide. Instead, they viewed physical pleasure as one of life's natural gifts, meant to be enjoyed and celebrated between loving partners. Their marriage ceremonies were fairly simple affairs, often just moving in together and sharing belongings. But this simplicity didn't mean they took marriage lightly. Egyptian couples expected loyalty, partnership, and mutual respect from each other. They built elaborate tombs where they hoped to spend eternity together, showing just how seriously they viewed their commitment. The legal protections for Egyptian wives were remarkable for their time. A woman could demand a divorce if her husband was cruel or unfaithful. She could keep her property and often received financial support. These rights wouldn't appear again in Western societies for thousands of years. Children learned about relationships by watching their parents work together as partners. Egyptian art shows couples standing as equals, often with the wife's hand resting affectionately on her husband's shoulder. This wasn't just artistic convention. It reflected real social values about marriage being a team effort. The Egyptians also understood that not every marriage would work out perfectly. Their acceptance of divorce when necessary was practical and compassionate. They recognized that forcing people to stay in unhappy relationships helped nobody, especially not the children involved. Even their religious beliefs supported healthy relationships. The goddess Hathor represented love, music, and joy, while Isis embodied the devoted wife and protective mother. These divine examples showed Egyptians that love and pleasure had sacred dimensions, worthy of honor and celebration. The legacy of Egyptian marriage customs rippled through history in unexpected ways. Their emphasis on partnership and women's rights would largely disappear for centuries as later civilizations adopted more restrictive approaches. The relative freedom Egyptian women enjoyed wouldn't return to Western societies until remarkably recently. Their straightforward acceptance of human sexuality as natural and healthy also got lost over time. Many later cultures developed complicated shame and guilt around physical relationships that the Egyptians simply didn't share. They understood that desire and pleasure were part of what made life worth living. The night sounds of ancient Egypt would have included lullabies sung to babies who had successfully navigated those dangerous first days. Mothers humming softly while fathers discussed the day's work, couples sharing quiet conversations about their hopes and dreams. The same stars that watched over these ancient families continue watching over our world today. There's something comforting about that continuity, that connection across thousands of years. The fundamental human experiences of love, partnership, and family haven't really changed. Even though the specifics of how we live them certainly have, those ancient Egyptians were dealing with the same basic hopes and challenges that couples face today, just in a very different setting. The mystery of bringing new life into the world has always carried both wonder and worry. In ancient Egypt, when a woman discovered she was expecting, the entire community began to prepare for what lay ahead. Birth was never a solitary affair, but rather a moment that brought together mothers, sisters, aunts, and neighbors in a circle of protection and care. Picture, if you will, a small mud brick house along the Nile, where the morning sun filters through palm fronds. Inside, a woman prepares for the most dangerous journey of her life. Childbirth in those days claimed many mothers and babies, making each successful birth feel like a miracle worth celebrating. The expectant mother would squat on special birthing bricks, their surfaces worn smooth by countless women before her. These weren't ordinary bricks, mind you. They were carved with protective symbols and images of gods who watched over mothers and children. The pregnant hippopotamus goddess Taurid stood guard, with her fierce maternal love, while Bez, a dwarf god with a comical face, frightened away any evil spirits that might threaten the new arrival. His grotesque appearance was actually meant to be reassuring, a reminder that even the smallest guardian could be mighty. The women gathered around the laboring mother would whisper ancient spells, their voices creating a cocoon of sound and safety. They pressed amulets into her hands, small tokens of protection that had been blessed at temples throughout the land. Honey, that golden gift from the gods, was offered both for nourishment and its supposed magical properties. When the baby finally emerged into the world, wet and crying, the celebration could be heard throughout the village. But perhaps most touching was the reaction of the fathers. These ancient Egyptian men didn't stand apart from family life, distant and formal. Instead, they wept with joy, danced in the streets, and immediately began planning how to provide for their newest family member. Egyptian fathers held their babies close, played with them in ways that might seem familiar to any modern parent, and took seriously their role as both provider and teacher. Ancient artwork shows us scenes of fathers bouncing toddlers on their knees, teaching older children to fish or farm, and walking hand in hand with their sons and daughters along the banks of the Great River. The community support didn't end when the baby arrived. Female relatives would take turns visiting the new mother, bringing practical gifts like swaddling cloths and sharing their own wisdom about raising children. They understood something we sometimes forget today, that raising a child requires an entire village working together. Musicians would often appear at these celebrations, their drums and flutes, creating melodies that seemed to speak directly to the heart. The music served multiple purposes, drowning out any cries of pain, celebrating the successful birth, and creating a joyful atmosphere that welcomed the new soul into the world. Children in ancient Egypt weren't just mouths to feed, but precious gifts that transformed marriages and strengthened family bonds. Couples who struggled to conceive would visit temples, leaving offerings at the feet of fertility gods and goddesses. They sought out healers who prescribed herbal remedies, some based on genuine medical knowledge, others rooted in hope and tradition. The texts from this ancient world tell us that having children was considered the primary purpose of marriage. Yet, Egyptians also understood that love between spouses mattered deeply. They valued the tender moments between husband and wife, the quiet conversations in the evening, the comfort of a partner's presence through life's challenges. When you imagine that new father, sitting outside his home as the sun climbs higher in the sky, cradling his tiny child for the first time, you're witnessing something that connects us across thousands of years. That look of wonder, that fierce protective love, that sudden understanding of how vast and fragile life can be, these emotions haven't changed at all. The swaddling cloths wrapped around the baby weren't just practical, they were symbolic too. Just as the Nile's floods brought new life to the land each year, this small bundle represented hope, continuity, and the eternal cycle of generations caring for one another. In the growing warmth of that ancient morning, surrounded by the gentle sounds of daily life, a family began its next chapter, watched over by gods and neighbors alike. The afternoon heat settles over everything like a heavy blanket, and somewhere in the distance, voices rise above the usual quiet hum of daily life. There's something about human conflict that draws our attention, isn't there? Even across thousands of years. In ancient Egypt, just like today, couples found plenty to disagree about. Picture this scene unfolding in the dusty streets. A woman stands outside her home, her hands moving as she speaks, clearly frustrated about something. Her husband shakes his head, that universal gesture that says he's not budging on whatever they're discussing. The neighbors walk by, slowing down just enough to catch a few words, but nobody steps in. That's how it worked back then. People minded their own business. When it came to marital disputes, Egyptian marriages, you see, faced all the same challenges that couples deal with today. Money troubles topped the list, naturally. When the Nile didn't flood properly, or when crops failed, or when taxes got too heavy, that stress came home with them. Then there were the personality clashes, those little irritations that grow bigger over time. Maybe she thought he was too generous with the neighbors. Maybe he thought she spent too much time gossiping at the well. Extended family created their own special kind of drama too. When you're living in close quarters with your in-laws, opinions about everything from child rearing to household management got shared whether you wanted them or not. And health problems, well, those were constant companions in a world where a simple infection could turn deadly. The ancient Egyptians, though, they weren't just stumbling around in the dark when it came to marriage advice. They wrote it all down, these wisdom texts that sound surprisingly modern when you really think about them. One piece of advice that survived thousands of years basically says, if you want a happy wife, keep her fed, clothed, and content. Fill her belly, clothe her back, the text says. Make her heart glad as long as you live. There's something beautifully practical about that approach. No flowery romance, no unrealistic expectations, just solid advice about meeting basic human needs. They understood that happy people make better partners, and that marriages work better when both people feel cared for. The heat of midday brings everything to a standstill, that drowsy time when even arguments pause for a while. The couple we imagined earlier, they've gone their separate ways for now. She's retreated into the cool darkness of their home. He's headed off toward the fields. Their body language suggests this disagreement isn't over, just postponed until the sun gets lower and tempers cool down. This pattern, this ebb and flow of conflict and resolution, it's as old as human relationships themselves. The Egyptians knew that some arguments don't get solved in a single conversation. Sometimes you need time, distance, maybe a good meal, and some sleep before you can see the other person's point of view. As afternoon stretches toward evening, life begins stirring again. Water carriers make their rounds, those heavy clay jars balanced perfectly on their shoulders. The communal ovens start warming up as women gather to prepare the evening meal. Children emerge from whatever shady spots they've been hiding in, ready to play again, now that the air has cooled just enough to make running around bearable. And then, something special catches the eye. A small group of people dressed in their finest clothes, carrying offerings of food and flowers, walking with purpose toward the village temple. This is how communities healed themselves, through ritual and ceremony, through coming together in shared purpose. These processions happened regularly, marking everything from seasonal festivals to personal celebrations, marriage ceremonies, naming days for children, harvest celebrations, even reconciliation rituals when families needed to patch up their own disputes. The temple served as neutral ground, a place where everyday conflicts could be set aside in favor of something larger. Picture yourself walking alongside a gentle procession, moving slowly through the dusty paths of an ancient village. The air carries the warm scent of burning incense, sweet and heavy, made from myrrh and frankincense, cinnamon and other precious spices mixed together into something they called kaifi. This fragrant smoke drifts upward, creating soft clouds that seem to connect. The earthing smoke drifts upward, creating soft clouds that seem to connect. The earthing smoke drifts upward, creating soft clouds that seem to connect. The earthing smoke that seem to connect. The earthing smoke that seem to connect. The earthing smoke that seem to connect. The procession winds its way toward a small shrine, nothing grand or imposing, just a humble place of worship dedicated to Hathor. She was one of Egypt's most beloved goddesses, watching over love, beauty, music, and motherhood. Artists always painted her with the most unusual features, cow's ears and horns curving gracefully around a golden sun disk that crowned her head. To modern eyes, it might seem strange, but to ancient Egyptians, these symbols held deep meaning about fertility and the nurturing power of the divine feminine. What's remarkable is how marriage worked in this ancient world. Unlike today, the actual wedding ceremony wasn't really a religious event at all. No priests performed the rituals, no sacred vows were exchanged in temples. Instead, marriage was more of a practical arrangement, a coming together of two people and their families. But that doesn't mean the gods were forgotten. They wove themselves into every thread of Egyptian life, including the most intimate moments of love and partnership. Young couples would visit shrines just like this one, bringing offerings and whispered prayers for blessings on their unions. Hathor received many of these requests, especially from women hoping for passionate love and healthy children. But she wasn't the only divine protector watching over Egyptian families. Isis, the great goddess who searched tirelessly across the world for her murdered husband Osiris, became the symbol of faithful, devoted married love. Her story reminded couples that true partnership meant standing by each other through the darkest times. Then there was Torere, a goddess with the body of a pregnant hippopotamus, who might look fierce but was actually the gentle guardian of pregnant women, and Bes, a dwarf god with a wild mane and protective scowl, who watched over households and helped women through childbirth. These weren't distant, untouchable deities living somewhere far away. They were intimate companions, present in bedrooms and kitchens, involved in the daily struggles and joys of ordinary people. The procession reaches the shrine now, and offerings are carefully placed before Hathor's image. Flowers, bread, small cups of beer, tokens of gratitude and hope. The priest begins his chant, his voice rising and falling in ancient rhythms that seem to bypass the mind and speak directly to something deeper in the soul. These sounds have echoed in this place for generations, connecting today's worshippers with countless others who stood here before, seeking the same blessings, hoping for the same happiness. As the ceremony winds down, people begin drifting back toward the village center, their faces peaceful and satisfied. The afternoon light has that special golden quality that makes everything look softer, more dreamlike. Village life is resuming its evening rhythm now. Women gathering to prepare the day's main meal, men clustering together to discuss work and weather, children darting between the adults in endless games. In this busy scene, your attention is drawn to an elderly couple sitting quietly outside their home. They're watching all the activity with gentle, contented expressions, and something about their presence feels deeply peaceful. The woman's fingers move skillfully as she weaves a basket, despite the fact that her hands show the wear of decades of work. Her husband carves something from a piece of wood, occasionally holding up his progress for her approval, which she gives with small nods and soft smiles. These two represent something quite extraordinary in ancient Egypt. They've clearly lived together for many years, probably decades, reaching an age that was considered remarkable in a time when most people died in their 30s or 40s. Life was hard then, filled with disease and physical demands that aged bodies quickly. To see a couple in their 50s or 60s was to witness something special, a love that had survived not just the ordinary challenges of marriage, but the harsh realities of ancient life itself. Their comfortable silence speaks volumes about what they've shared together. These are two people who have moved through all the seasons of partnership, from young passion through the intense years of raising children, into this quieter time when words are often unnecessary. Their occasional glances hold the easy intimacy of those who know each other's thoughts who have learned to communicate in the subtle language that only develops after years of true companionship. The spiritual and earthly aspects of their marriage have clearly intertwined over time, creating something that feels almost sacred in its ordinariness. They've probably visited shrines like the one you just left many times over the years, praying for children, for health, for protection, for all the things that married couples have always hoped for. And somehow, through luck, or divine favor, or simple human determination, they've found their way to this peaceful evening, still together, still content in each other's presence. This scene captures something essential about how ancient Egyptians understood love and partabi. Marriage wasn't just about two individuals choosing each other. It was about becoming part of something larger, a community that supported and sustained relationships through all their phases. The gods weren't separate from this human experience. They were woven into it, providing comfort and guidance and hope when the path grew difficult. Ancient Egyptians carried a remarkable belief deep in their hearts, one that would shape how they lived and loved. They saw death not as an ending, but as a doorway, a simple transition from one room of existence to another. This wasn't just philosophy, it was as real to them as sunrise. Picture the way they painted their tomb walls. These weren't just pretty pictures. A husband and wife would appear together, sometimes reaching for each other's hands, sometimes sharing a meal, sometimes hunting birds in the papyrus marshes. Every brushstroke held intention, every color carried magic. These images were meant to make those same joys available forever, in whatever came next. The field of reeds, that's what they called their paradise. Not golden streets or pearly gates, but endless marshlands where the hunting was good and the company was eternal. Married couples planned to meet there, to continue their love story in a place where time moved differently, where the bread never went stale and the beer never ran out. You can almost see them now, can't you? An elderly couple sitting outside their mud brick home as evening settles over their village. The heat of the day finally breaking, replaced by something gentler, something that makes you want to breathe deeper. Their faces tell stories, lined by decades under the Egyptian sun, marked by laughter and worry and 1,000 small moments that make up a life. 52 years together, imagine that. In a time when most people were lucky to see 40 winters, this woman reaches for her husband's weathered hand with the same tenderness she showed as a young bride. 6 children born, 4 survived, 17 grandchildren running around the village, causing the kind of trouble that makes grandparents smile. This was the Egyptian dream, really. Not wealth or power, though those were nice, but a marriage that lasted, children who lived, grandchildren, to carry your name forward. A partnership so strong it could survive anything, even death itself. The daughter brings them their evening meal, simple food made precious by sharing, fresh bread still warm from the oven, onions that make your eyes water just thinking about them, fish pulled from the Nile that morning, a small jar of beer thick enough to be almost like soup. Nothing fancy, but everything needed. Above them, the stars begin their nightly show. Without electric lights to compete, the sky reveals itself completely, the Milky Way stretching from horizon to horizon like a river of light flowing parallel to the Nile below. The same stars that watched over pharaohs now keep vigil over fishermen and farmers and grandmothers telling bedtime stories. The old man's voice carries easily in the still air as he begins the ancient tale, the one about Isis and Osiris, the divine couple whose love proved stronger than murder. His wife knows every word but lets him tell it his way, only jumping in when he forgets the part about the tamarisk tree or gets confused about which city the chest washed up in. It's more than just a story though. It's a template, a promise, a roadmap for how love should work. When Osiris was killed and his body scattered across Egypt, Isis didn't give up, didn't remarry, didn't move on. She searched every corner of the kingdom until she found every piece, put him back together through sheer determination and magic that came from the heart. Even conceived their son Horus after Osiris had died, because some loves are too powerful for death to interrupt. This wasn't seen as mythology, it was instruction manual, showing married couples exactly how far their devotion should reach. The story winds down like a clock running out of spring, the old man's voice growing softer as the night grows deeper. His wife adds the final details about baby Horus growing up to avenge his father, and then they both fall quiet, satisfied with another good telling of an old tale. They rise together, these two people who have shared more than half a century, moving with the careful choreography that comes from knowing exactly when your partner needs help standing up, exactly where to put your hand so they won't stumble. At the doorway of their small house, the woman turns back. One more time, her smile holding all the warmth of a long life well lived. The night settles around the village like a blanket, oil lamps flickering in windows, the last conversations of the day fading into comfortable silence. Somewhere a baby cries briefly before being soothed. Somewhere else an old dog sighs and settles deeper into sleep. This was ancient Egypt, after the sun went down, not the Egypt of monuments and mummies, but the Egypt of people who loved each other enough to plan for eternity together, who believed so completely in forever that they built their entire lives around the promise of it. In ancient Egypt, as darkness settled over the villages each night, craftsmen would carefully set down their tools, knowing tomorrow would bring new creations to life. The artisans who shaped metal and stone understood something profound about love, something that went far beyond simple decoration. They created objects that carried the weight of human emotion, pieces that would bind hearts across lifetimes. The jewelry workshops of ancient Egypt were places of transformation, where raw materials became vessels for the deepest feelings. Carnelian, with its deep red glow, was shaped into heart amulets that represented far more than romance. To the Egyptians, the heart was the center of all thought, all emotion, all character. When a man gave his wife a carnelian heart, he was offering her a piece of his very essence. These ancient people understood that love needed physical reminders to anchor it in the world. While they didn't exchange wedding rings as we do today, they marked the milestones of marriage with carefully chosen gifts. The birth of a first child, significant anniversaries, moments of joy and sorrow, all were commemorated with jewelry that carried protective power alongside its beauty. Lapis lazuli, that stunning blue stone flecked with gold, was more precious than many gems we treasure today. Egyptian artisans would string it alongside turquoise and gold, creating necklaces that seemed to capture pieces of the sky itself. Women wore these not just for beauty, but as talismans connecting them to the divine forces that governed love and fertility. The workshops where these treasures were born were intimate places, often family businesses where fathers taught sons the sacred geometry of creation. Cross-legged on simple mats, bent over copper tables worn smooth by generations of use, these craftsmen moved with the precision of surgeons. Their fingers knew exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly when the metal had reached the perfect temperature for shaping. Turquoise held special meaning in Egyptian culture, representing rebirth and protection. When woven into jewelry intended for newlyweds, it carried prayers for the couple's future, hopes that their love would renew itself through each passing season. The stone's blue-green color reminded viewers of the life-giving Nile, of fertility, of the endless cycle of growth and renewal that governed Egyptian life. Gold, of course, was the flesh of the gods themselves. Egyptian goldsmiths could work this precious metal into threads finer than human hair, creating jewelry so delicate it seemed to float on the wearer's skin. But gold wasn't just valuable because of its rarity. Its color, that warm yellow that never tarnished or faded, represented the eternal nature of true love, the kind that would survive even death itself. The process of creating these love tokens was almost ritualistic. Artisans would begin work at dawn, when the air was cool and their hands steady. They understood that jewelry meant to celebrate love required a calm heart to create. The hammering had its own rhythm, like a heartbeat, steady and reassuring. The cooling metal would hiss as it touched water, a sound that seemed to seal the maker's intentions into the piece. Women of higher status could afford more elaborate pieces, necklaces that cascaded across their chests like frozen waterfalls of stone and metal. But even the simplest amulet, carved from common stone and strung on linen thread, carried the same symbolic weight. Love, in ancient Egypt, wasn't measured by the value of the gift, but by the intention behind it. The workshops themselves were gathering places where the community's romantic stories unfolded. Young men would arrive nervously, clutching carefully saved coins, seeking the perfect piece to present to a hoped-for bride. Married couples would return year after year, adding to collections that told the story of their growing love, their expanding family, their shared journey through life. These ancient artisans knew that love needed witnesses, needed objects that could hold memories when human hearts grew forgetful. A bracelet worn during courtship would later be passed to a daughter, carrying with it the story of how her parents met. An amulet blessed at a wedding would eventually accompany its owner to the afterlife, ensuring that love would continue beyond death's boundary. The tools used in these workshops were simple, but perfectly suited to their purpose. Sandstone for polishing, copper needles for the finest work, small hammers worn smooth by countless hands, each tool carried the touch of previous generations, connecting the current artisan to an unbroken chain of creators stretching back to the very beginning of Egyptian civilization. The scent of precious metals and polished stones drifted through the air as skilled hands worked their magic. In ancient Egypt, jewelry wasn't just decoration. It carried deep meaning, whispered promises of protection, spoke of love and devotion. The golden pieces that emerged from these workshops bore symbols older than memory itself. The Ankh symbol, that distinctive cross with a loop at the top, represented life itself, eternal and unending. When Egyptian couples exchanged jewelry bearing this sacred mark, they weren't simply giving gifts, they were sharing wishes for long life together, for protection from the unseen dangers that lurked in their world. The Eye of Horus, carved with delicate precision into gold and silver, watched over lovers with divine vigilance. Turquoise held special power in Egyptian belief, its blue-green color echoing the life-giving waters of the Nile, the endless expanse of sky above the desert. When set into rings and bracelets, these stones became talismans carrying the strength of gods and goddesses into everyday life. The weight of such jewelry on the skin served as constant reminder of divine favor. Payment for these precious items came in forms we might find curious today. Small pouches clinked, not with coins as we know them, but with standardized pieces of precious metal. Egypt's economy ran on weight and purity, silver rings and gold fragments measured carefully on bronze scales. Each transaction required trust, skill in evaluation, understanding of metals that could mean the difference between fair trade and deception. The goddess Hathor smiled down on lovers with particular kindness, her cow ears and gentle face appearing in countless small figurines. These weren't mere decorations for the home, but active participants in the spiritual life of Egyptian families. Made from faience, that brilliant blue-glazed ceramic that caught light, like captured pieces of sky, these figures received prayers, offerings, whispered hopes in the quiet hours of evening. Couples approached Hathor with requests that might surprise those from more reserved cultures. The Egyptians saw no shame in asking their goddess for passion, for physical joy in marriage, for the deep satisfaction that comes when two people truly know each other. Their prayers encompassed every aspect of love, from the tender emotions that bloom in courtship to the fierce desires that bind couples together through long years. The sound of mourning carried differently in the Egyptian air, not with the desperate grief we might expect, but with something approaching celebration. Death, in their understanding, was simply a doorway, a passage from one form of existence to another. The elaborate rituals that surrounded this transition reflected not fear, but careful preparation for a journey everyone would eventually take. Blue bands woven into morning hair caught the morning light, their color chosen not randomly but with purpose. Blue connected the living to the divine realm, helped ease the passage between worlds, provided comfort to those left behind. These weren't signs of despair, but signals of hope, declarations that separation was temporary, that love transcended even death itself. The wooden biers that carried the wrapped dead were crafted with the same care given to furniture for the living. Smooth planks fitted perfectly together, carved handles worn smooth by countless processions, wheels that rolled steadily over sand and stone. These weren't tools of sorrow, but vehicles of transformation, carrying souls toward their eternal destinations. Egyptian marriage extended far beyond the brief span of mortal life. Couples planned not just for years together, but for centuries, for millennia, for time without end. Their tomb preparations reflected this extraordinary faith in love's permanence. Husband and wife might share a single burial chamber, their wrapped bodies lying side by side as they had in life, or they might occupy connected rooms, doorways linking their eternal homes, just as their hearts had been linked in life. The grave goods that accompanied them tell stories of remarkable optimism. Furniture crafted for eternal use, clothing woven to last forever, jewelry designed to sparkle through endless ages. Games and toys suggested that the afterlife wouldn't be all solemnity and worship, but would include leisure, laughter, the simple pleasures that made earthly existence sweet. Servant figures, carved and painted with meticulous detail, stood ready to attend the deceased couple in their new existence. These weren't symbols of wealth or status, but practical preparations for a life they believed would continue much as it had before. The Egyptians imagined eternity, not as some ghostly, ethereal experience, but as vivid and real as the world they knew. The tomb paintings that decorated burial chambers served purposes both beautiful and magical. When artists depicted couples seated together at offering tables, their hands intertwined, their faces turned toward each other with obvious affection, they weren't creating mere memories. Egyptian belief held that these images possessed power, that what was shown would become reality in the world beyond death, through paint and stone, through careful arrangement of possessions and positioning of bodies. Egyptian couples ensured their love story would continue writing itself through eternity. The grave wasn't an ending, but a new chapter. Death, not separation, but transition to a place where time held no power over the bonds they had forged in life. When people first think about ancient Egypt, they usually picture towering pyramids or golden masks, but beneath all that grandeur, there were ordinary couples, holding hands, sharing whispers, arguing about daily life. The heart wants what it wants. Whether you're living in modern times or along the banks of the Nile thousands of years ago, the Egyptians had something remarkable, something that might surprise you. Their approach to love and marriage was, in many ways, more progressive than what came after. Women could own property, they could initiate divorce, they could keep their names after marriage. This wasn't some distant feminist ideal, this was daily reality along the ancient Nile. Picture a young woman named Nefertiti, not the famous queen, just an ordinary baker's daughter. She could choose her husband, negotiate her marriage contract, even walk away if things didn't work out. Her father couldn't simply trade her off like livestock. Her voice mattered in ways that would vanish for centuries in other cultures. Love poetry flowed like the river itself in ancient Egypt. Passionate verses carved into stone, written on papyrus, whispered in temple courtyards. These weren't stiff, formal declarations. They burned with desire, ached with longing, celebrated the physical and emotional bonds between lovers. One poem describes a woman's heart racing like a bird's wings when she sees her beloved approaching. The wedding ceremonies themselves were surprisingly informal. No massive state affairs, no elaborate religious rituals. A couple simply decided to live together, perhaps with a feast, some gifts exchanged between families. The real commitment came in the daily choice to stay, to build something together, to weather life's storms side by side. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. The Egyptians believed marriage continued after death. Tomb paintings show couples holding hands in the afterlife, sharing meals, enjoying each other's company for eternity. Death wasn't the end of their bond, just a transition to a different kind of togetherness. Divorce existed, and it wasn't scandalous. Sometimes people grew apart, sometimes circumstances changed. The Egyptians accepted this as part of human nature. They had practical laws about dividing property, caring for children, supporting former spouses. It wasn't vindictive or punitive, just, well, sensible. Children were treasured, but not having them didn't doom a marriage. Adoption was common, accepted, celebrated. Stepchildren were loved as deeply as biological ones. The family unit was fluid, flexible, built on choice and care, rather than just blood ties. The daily rhythms of married life played out much like they do today. Couples worked together, shared responsibilities, supported each other's dreams and ambitions. Husbands helped with household tasks, wives contributed to family businesses. Gender roles existed, but they were more flexible than you might expect. Even the physical expressions of love were openly celebrated. Egyptian art shows couples embracing, kissing, gazing into each other's eyes. This wasn't considered shameful or private. Love was seen as a gift from the gods, something to be honored and displayed with pride. The Nile itself became a metaphor for marriage in Egyptian poetry. Sometimes calm and nurturing, sometimes wild and unpredictable, but always life-giving, always essential. Couples would take boat rides together, watch the sunrise paint the water gold, share quiet moments as the ancient river flowed past, carrying the dreams and hopes of countless generations. What strikes you most about all this isn't how different they were, but how familiar their hearts remain. The young bride nervous on her wedding day, the husband working extra hours to provide for his family, the elderly couple still holding hands after decades together. Time changes the setting, but the story stays wonderfully, recognizably human. Their wisdom echoes across the centuries, reminding us that love isn't a modern invention. It's as old as the pyramids, as eternal as the desert stars, as constant as the river that gave birth to one of humanity's greatest civilizations. Ancient Egypt understood something profound about love and partnership that we sometimes forget today. Marriage wasn't just a moment, a single celebration, but rather a long journey that stretched across lifetimes. These ancient people saw relationships as something that could transcend even death itself, continuing into whatever came next. The practical side of their approach reveals remarkable wisdom. They knew that love alone wasn't enough to build a life together. Property rights mattered deeply, ensuring that both partners had security and protection. Legal frameworks supported these unions, creating stability in an uncertain world. Yet this wasn't cold calculation, but rather a recognition that true love requires a solid foundation to flourish upon. In the villages along the Great River, jewelers would spend countless hours crafting symbols of devotion. Each piece told a story, representing promises made between two hearts. The metals would gleam in the marketplace, catching sunlight that had traveled millions of miles to illuminate these small tokens of human connection. These weren't mere decorations, but rather physical manifestations of invisible bonds. When someone's journey in this world ended, the community would gather for elaborate processions. Death wasn't seen as an ending, but as a transition, a doorway to the next chapter. Married couples believed their connection would continue beyond the physical realm, that the love they had built together was strong enough to survive any transformation. This perspective shaped how they approached their relationships while still alive, knowing that what they created together had eternal significance. Young couples would walk along the riverbanks at sunset, their footsteps marking the same paths that countless generations had followed before them. The Nile had witnessed millions of these quiet moments, these gentle conversations about hopes and dreams. Water flowed past them toward distant seas, carrying whispers and promises downstream. The complexity of human relationships fascinated these ancient people. They understood that marriage was like a mosaic, made up of countless small pieces that together created something beautiful. Daily interactions, shared meals, quiet evenings, moments of joy and sorrow, all combining to form a pattern that was unique to each couple. Social needs intertwined with personal desires in ways that required careful balance. Families had expectations, communities had traditions, yet individual happiness remained important. Finding harmony between these different forces required patience and wisdom. The ancient Egyptians developed customs that honored both collective responsibilities and private emotions. Physical connection held deep significance in their understanding of marriage. They saw the human body not as something shameful, but as a sacred vessel capable of expressing profound love. Intimacy between spouses was celebrated as one of life's great gifts, a way for two souls to communicate without words. Emotional bonds received equal recognition. These ancient people understood that the heart's needs were as real and important as any physical requirements. They valued the comfort that comes from truly knowing another person, from sharing fears and hopes with someone who understands completely. This emotional intimacy was seen as precious, something to be nurtured and protected. The night sky above Egypt held special meaning for married couples. Stars represented permanence in a changing world, celestial bodies that would continue their dance long after any individual life had ended. Looking up together at this vast display reminded partners that they were part of something much larger than themselves, participants in a cosmic story that had been unfolding for countless ages. Village life provided the backdrop for these relationships to develop and flourish. Neighbors knew each other's stories, children played together in dusty streets, and everyone shared in both celebrations and sorrows. Marriage wasn't just a private matter between two individuals, but rather something that affected the entire community. This collective support helped couples weather difficult times and provided witnesses to their joy. The wisdom of these ancient people continues to whisper across the centuries, reminding us that love is both simple and infinitely complex. Their approach balanced heart and mind, emotion and practicality, individual desires and community needs. Perhaps most importantly, they understood that true partnership requires both parties to grow and change while remaining fundamentally committed to each other's well-being. The ancient Egyptians understood something we're still trying to figure out today, that love isn't just about the grand gestures, it's about the everyday choices, the quiet moments, the way two people decide to build something together. Their marriages weren't so different from ours really, filled with the same mixture of practicality and passion, the same hope that somehow this connection might outlast everything else. In the shadow of the Great Pyramids, ordinary people fell in love just like we do. A farmer would court his neighbor's daughter, bringing her small gifts, maybe a piece of jewelry carved from bone, or honey from his hives. The wealthy merchants had their own rituals, elaborate ceremonies where families would negotiate not just dowries, but the future of entire bloodlines. Yet, underneath all that ceremony, hearts still fluttered, with the same nervous excitement we know so well. What's fascinating is how they thought about time itself when it came to love. For them, marriage wasn't just a contract for this life, it was a promise that stretched into eternity. They believed deeply that the bonds formed on earth would continue in the afterlife, in those peaceful fields of reeds where the soul would find rest. Couples would be buried with matching amulets, symbols of their connection that death couldn't break. The poetry they left behind reveals so much about how they felt. One ancient love song speaks of a young man's heart racing when he sees his beloved by the river, washing clothes in the morning light. Another tells of a woman comparing her lover to the sweetest wine, to the coolest water on a burning day. These weren't royal proclamations or religious texts, just people expressing the same feelings that make our own hearts skip. Their wedding ceremonies had a wonderful simplicity to them. No massive churches or elaborate vows, just two families coming together, sharing food and drink, celebrating the moment when two lives became one. The bride might wear flowers in her hair, lotus blossoms that symbolized rebirth and new beginnings. The groom would present his gifts, not as payment, but as promises of the life they'd build together. Egyptian women had more freedom than many of their ancient counterparts. They could own property, run businesses, even initiate divorce if the marriage turned sour. This wasn't a society where women were simply traded between families like livestock. They were partners, equals in many ways, expected to contribute to the household's prosperity and happiness. Denial itself played a role in their love stories. Young couples would meet along its banks, where the fertile mud promised abundance and life. The river's annual flooding brought not just rich soil for crops, but a renewal of hope, a reminder that life always finds a way to begin again. Many courtships bloomed during those festival times, when the whole community would gather to celebrate the river's gift. Children were treasured in these marriages, seen as blessings from the gods, continuation of the family line that stretched back through countless generations. But even couples without children weren't considered incomplete. Love itself was valuable, worthy of celebration and protection, something that made life richer, whether or not it produced offspring. The artwork they created shows us intimate moments that feel remarkably familiar. Tomb paintings depict couples sitting together, sharing meals, the woman's hand resting gently on her husband's shoulder. These weren't formal portraits meant to impress, but genuine attempts to capture the tenderness that defined their relationships, the quiet affection that made daily life bearable. Death was never far from their thoughts, but rather than making them morbid, it seemed to intensify their appreciation for love. They knew their time together was limited, measured in decades rather than eternities, so they savored what they had. Letters between spouses often speak of missing each other during brief separations, of counting the days until reunion. Their gods themselves were often depicted as couples, divine partnerships that mirrored earthly marriage. Isis and Osiris, whose love story included betrayal, death, and miraculous resurrection, became the template for how devoted couples should behave. Even in the face of tragedy, love could triumph, could literally bring the dead back to life. The practical side of Egyptian marriage was never hidden behind romantic ideals. Contracts were written, property was divided, responsibilities were clearly outlined, but this wasn't cynicism, it was wisdom. They understood that love needed structure to survive, that passion without planning was just another form of chaos. Trade and travel brought Egyptian couples into contact with people from distant lands, exposing them to different ways of thinking about marriage and family. Yet they maintained their own traditions, their belief that the best relationships combined deep affection with mutual respect, personal freedom with shared responsibility. Even the poorest families celebrated weddings with whatever they could afford: music, dancing, special foods prepared with care and shared with joy. Wealth might determine the scale of the celebration, but it couldn't create the happiness that came from two people choosing to face life together. The desert preserved many of their personal belongings, giving us glimpses into the private lives of these ancient couples. Love letters written on papyrus, jewelry, exchanged as tokens of affection, even children's toys that speak to the family life these marriages created. Time collapsed these intimate moments into museum displays, but the emotions behind them remained vivid and real. Their understanding of marriage evolved over the centuries, influenced by changing dynasties, foreign conquests, and shifting religious beliefs. Yet certain core ideas persisted. The notion that partnership between equals created something stronger than either person could achieve alone, that love was worth celebrating, worth preserving, worth hoping would somehow continue beyond the grave. These ancient Egyptian couples left us more than just monuments and artifacts. They left us examples of how to balance individual desires with shared dreams, how to build something lasting in a world where everything seems temporary, how to find meaning in the simple act of choosing to love another person. Day after day, year after year, for as long as the heart continues to beat.
you.